It was my first time feeling like, "Oh my god, I can really do this, like, for real, like, I'm not just messing around on a Word document, like, someone read this."
At that age especially, it's less about the thing that you're making and more about deepening your relationship with your craft.
How do we have difficult conversations about traditionally hard to speak to topics using technology and the quilt medium to sort of create this engaging conversation?
Welcome to Hall Pass. You're listening to the official podcast of the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, presented by the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers. This show will encompass a series of interviews about how art, writing, and creativity have shaped the lives and careers of Scholastic Art and Writing Awards alumni. So, sit back, relax, and let's get inspired. Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name is Avery and I will be your official Hall Pass host. This is episode 2 and I am so excited that you are back and joining us today to gain a little bit of inspiration and continue the momentum of your art, your writing, whatever your medium of creativity is. If you found inspiration listening to our last episode, just wait for the awards alumni I'm chatting with today. And I'm especially talking to you, aspiring authors, because I had the most inspirational conversation with a brand new debut young adult author who only recently went through the entire process of submitting to literary agents and going on submission with publishing houses. And if you have any questions at all about what is this process really like, how can I prepare for it, this is the episode for you. Artists, don't think I forgot about you whatsoever, because we have an awesome conversation as well with a very recent gold medal portfolio winner. So stick around to listen to that, because we're going to give you some tips for how to enhance your portfolio and make it the best that it can possibly be. Before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to share a brief quote from one of our famous Scholastic Art and Writing Awards alumni. You might have heard of his name once or twice before. This is Stephen King from his book On Writing, a memoir of the craft. And if you have not picked up this book, I could not recommend it more. It is full of real-world advice and wisdom for making a living as a writer, and this advice could easily apply to artists as well, so I highly recommend it. Writing is a lonely job. Having someone who believes in you makes a lot of the difference. They don't have to make speeches, just believing is usually enough. I love this quote because it really highlights what the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards does best, and that is helping with that first step in an artist or writer's life and proclaiming to the world, I am an artist, I am a writer. And those can be really scary words to say out loud to yourself, let alone to the people you love. But if there's anything you get out of this episode, I highly encourage you to tell your family, tell your parents, your friends, go on social media and tell the world that you are an artist, you are a writer. It does not matter in the slightest whether you have published 1 million books like Stephen King has, or maybe you haven't published anything at all. You are a writer if you write, and that is the end of the story. Our first guest today has been involved with the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards since 2012, when she received her first gold medal in novel writing. Over the next 2 years, this guest went on to win 3 more Scholastic Awards, an American Voices Medal in poetry, and 2 silver medals in novel writing. She is currently an elementary school teacher centering her teaching around critical race theory at the primary education level. Shut Up, This Is Serious is her debut YA novel, which came out this year on January 9th, and all links to buy her book will be found in the show notes. I hope you enjoy my conversation with author Carolina Ixta.
I currently am a 4th grade bilingual teacher. I teach a bilingual class. I'm currently in my classroom on my prep. My kids are outside doing PE
Oh my
right
gosh.
now. But I'm also a young adult author. My first novel, Shut Up, This is Serious, is out, which is really, it's really scary.
So exciting.
Yes, it's exciting. That's a better word, but it's also really scary. I did do the Art and Writing Awards in like the 2010s. I think I participated from 2012 to 2014 when I was in high school. After that, I made the decision not to go to art school. I thought about it pretty heavily. But I'd done the novel writing category 3 years in a row, and I was a little burnt out on writing. And I think I really just wanted to dedicate my time to being a student. So I studied at UC Santa Cruz. I did go into the creative writing department, but I also double majored in Spanish language and Spanish studies. And then I minored in education because I knew that I wanted to be a teacher.
Mhm.
I then went to UC Berkeley, like literally the day after I graduated from undergrad. I went to Berkeley and got my master's degree to become an elementary school teacher. I got a bilingual certification. I did a lot of studying around education, but like at the core, I've always wanted to be a writer. And when I was in my first year teaching, I started writing this manuscript. I'd been working on a different manuscript. It was, and I think this is the large misconception with debuts. Everyone thinks it's like your first book, right? But I've counted a couple of times, and I think this is my 7th attempt of writing a book. Yeah, it takes a while.
Amazing.
It
Yep.
takes a lot of trial and error, but this was the one that stuck. And it also felt like the one where I said, this is what I want to say. Like, if I'm being introduced to the publishing world, this is how I want to be introduced. And it took off from there.
Can we hear a little bit more about the publishing process and more of the specifics of what that was like for you?
It's really interesting. And I think many writers feel very jaded by their creative writing programs. And I had a really good time in mine, but I think my resentment, I think, could be applied to all creative writing programs, which is like, we read and we study, but no one is teaching you how to get a book published. And many of my writer friends and I have had this conversation, and we wonder if it's like on purpose. I'm like, there's so much gatekeeping in publishing. It's a relentlessly competitive industry. There's, I think, a lot of opacity on it with it on purpose to make it very confusing for people to understand, how do we get published? Like, I remember being in my senior seminar, like I was 3 months shy of graduation. I knew I was going to go to graduate school, but one of my peers asked our professor, hey, like, can you teach us how to write a query letter? And she very dismissively said, just Google it. That stuck with me for a long time, because I remember being like, okay, I'll just Google it when time comes.
Right.
It's not that simple. I learned it's really not that simple, but I had no guidance on how to become a published writer. I knew how to be a writer because I'd been practicing. I knew how to be a reader. I had no idea how to make it a profession until I was teaching. And I was maybe 75% of the way done with my manuscript when I heard about a program called Las Mustas, which is a mentorship program for Latino women. They partner, or they pair mentees with mentors who have been traditionally published. And I submitted my manuscript. My friend Kat, who I met in undergrad, really was like, I think you would be a great person for this. And she had gotten a children's book published. And I heard back from a woman named Raquel Vasquez Gilliland, who wrote How Moon Fuentes Fell in Love with the Universe, and Cia Martinez and The Moonlit Beginning of Everything. And I think she has her first adult romance book is out. It's called Witch of Wild Things. And I think she has a collection of poetry. I think it's called Dirt and Honey. She's fantastic. And she called me and said, I really want to work with you. And I had no idea what I was doing. I just said, okay, like, I have to finish the book still. And she said, yep, we can help finish. We can help edit. And she really, like, she's in my acknowledgement section. And I tell her all the time, there's mentors, and then there are like good mentors. And she was a phenomenal mentor, not only in the sense of telling me what is needed. She said, hey, your manuscript is 100,000 words long. Nobody's going to look at it. It needs to be 80 or less. That's a really random thing. I had no idea that was a requirement. She said, here's my query letter for my first YA novel. You can look at it and try to finagle it in the same way. All of those things seemed like such minute, like not even minute, but like par for the course. But after having been in a creative writing program where you would think that would be given, I was so stunned that she was being so generous. And eventually she told me, okay, you need a query letter to get an agent. So we drafted the query letter a couple of times. And then again, very generously, she said, I think my agent would actually really, really, really like your book. And she set me up with her agent, and I signed to her agency in about less than a week. Like I was on sub for, I think, or on query submission for less than a week, which is very rare. And I want to say that, like, to the writers listening, it's very, 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 very
But it
rare.
can happen. It's possible.
It can happen. Yes, it can happen. But I do want to say that Raquel did prepare me. Like, some people are querying for years. Some people are on Twitter actively looking for an agent for years. Some people are on manuscript wish list for years. And for me, it happened within a handful of days, but it is a very, like, I had so much help. And I just want to, like, make that clear. She was so generous. And from there, I worked with my agent. My agent is an editorial agent. I mean, she used to be a book editor. So she looked at my manuscript and said, I want to make it as easy as we can. Like, I don't want any editor to say, well, it needs to be trimmed. Well, you need to think about this. So she did a lot of that work with me. We cut probably 10,000 additional words and changed things around. And then I was on sub. She put the book on sub. And again, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, we were on the phone. I was here in my classroom. And she said, okay, we're going to go on sub. And it was like a Thursday. And I said, okay, like on Monday. And she said, no, like right now, like I'm going to send it right now at this moment. And I went home and I cried. Like I cried and cried and cried. And I was like, no one's going to like my book. Like, this is so scary. It's just so fast. And she emailed me the next morning that HarperCollins was interested. And I looked at the timestamps on all of the email threads, which is I went with Harper. That's my house. And I think we like sold the book in 5 or 6 hours. And then we immediately, had a couple more people who were interested, and we were going to go to auction, but I had a very good feeling about Jen, my editor. We had hopped on a Zoom call. She asked the best questions. She gave the best feedback. And so I ended up signing a preempt before we went to auction.
Amazing. Thank you so much for including so many specific details, because right there with you, so much love for my creative writing experience, but I also had to learn all of that stuff on my own. So I think that's an incredibly relatable experience. So thank you for sharing that. Something to note also is just the benefit of giving back to other young writers. Just a reminder to keep giving back to people who are in the same shoes that you were once in.
Yes, it's for sure a pay it forward process, and something that I'm learning even now. Like, the book is published, getting a blurb or a review.
Right.
It's all writing is I'm going to pay it forward. I remember when I didn't have X thing.
So taking it back to your Scholastic Awards experience, would you just kind of talk about your emotions behind winning and how that kind of impacted your confidence as a writer?
Again, I had no idea what I was doing. I did not go to art school, and I've spoken about this quite a bit. I was on residency with art and writing in 2019, and I met with Tendo and with Chris. I remember Chris asked, like, so what was this process like for you? And we were like at the top of the Scholastic building having lunch. And I told him, like, oh, I just Googled like writing contest, and this is the first thing that came up. And this is the only thing that offered a novel writing category. And I just kind of went for it. And I have so much like admiration for my 15-year-old self, who just was like, you know what? The worst they can say is no. But again, I had no idea what I was doing. I had written a manuscript, and that was my third attempt at that point of writing a book. I think I wrote my first novel when I was 13 or 12. And so I was trying and trying and trying. And I submitted it. And I remember I needed a teacher to sign off. And I went to my English teacher, and she told me no. I remember being like, I remember thinking, to be clear to everyone, I went to a regular public Title I high school, overcrowded, underfunded, and I had no guidance. I had never taken a creative writing class. I just really love to read. So when I went to my English teacher and I was like, all you need to do is sign the sheet of paper that gives me permission to submit. And she didn't say no, but she did that very like judgmental, like, well, I guess I need to find out more information. I just can't sign my name onto anything, And like, I was 15, I had I had no idea. So I went to my biology teacher and I
Ooh.
was like, hey, Mr. Doan, like, I really need like a sponsor, I guess, for this. And it's so funny, especially now as a teacher, because he said, all I have to do is sign my name on a sheet of paper. And I said, yeah. And he signed and I submitted. And then afterward, I did research because the deadline, I believe, had been so quickly or had been very quick. So I did research and then I realized what I had submitted to. And I was like, oh my gosh, Sylvia Plath has won this award and Andy Warhol has won this award and Richard Linklater and Truman Capote and Cy Twombly, like all of these really important people. And I spiraled into like a lot of what I now recognize as imposter syndrome of like, man, I'm going to lose and it's fine, but you know, I'm going to lose and it'll be fine. And that'll be that. And obsessively for months, I checked every day, you know, this online portal, and novel writing submissions took longer at the time. And I eventually went on the portal and I had won a gold medal. And I remember thinking, this is a mistake. Like, because I thought like, I don't go to art school. Like,
Right.
I learn from example. All I do is read. And then it clearly wasn't. And it was my first time feeling like, oh my God, I can really do this. Like for real. Like I'm not just messing around on a Word document. Like someone read this. And I believe that was a year that Ned Vizzini had judged. And Ned Vizzini at the time was one of my favorite writers. So it was a like double whammy sense of validation of like, I tried, I won like a top tier award. One of my favorite writers was a judge. Like it was a very surreal moment for me as a young person and an adolescent. It changed my confidence level because before I truly thought this is a fun hobby. I don't know anyone else who does this, who like writes longhand in a journal at school and then goes home and like types it all up, but this is a really cool thing and hobby that I can do. And getting an award, it changed my high school trajectory. My biology teacher after that was like, we're calling the local paper. It was the start of a really beautiful thing for my community as well, because again, I went to this severely underfunded, severely overcrowded high school where nothing like that was happening. And my community was really proud of me. The school was very proud. And I then did it multiple times after. I was like, I'm going to write another one and then I'm going to write another one. It was the first time that I really thought this could be my job. I don't know how I'm going to make it happen, but for right now, this is what I'm going to do until I can't do it anymore. And it's what I did until I graduated from high school. I'd cancel plans and be like, I have to write my book. Like, and looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, it was crazy. But also it's what I do today. It's like, no, I'm not going to the bar. I have to like do this. I'm not going to do that. Right now I have to revise. I have to do my copy edits. I have to do my lines. So yeah, it prepared me. It gave me the confidence and prepared me with a sense of immeasurable discipline that if I saw a 15-year-old doing what I was doing, I'd be like, yeah, there might be something a little bit wrong with you, but like keep going, you know, like keep going. You should keep doing that.
Well, one of the first steps to having writing become your career is treating it like your career. And it seems like you did that from the earliest of ages.
Oh, yeah. I took it seriously. And that is very true. I think as a creative person now, and I even hesitate saying that, but there's so much to say about creative discipline. Art is so fun and you can do it when you're feeling it. But when you want art to be your job, you have to commit to the discipline of sitting there and doing it when you don't want to and doing it when you don't have an idea and treating it all like practice. And I think that time of my life was me practicing.
So what would you say to our teens out there who maybe are on the fence about entering the awards, particularly because of how scary and intimidating it can be to put your work out there for the very first time? What would you tell those teens?
The way that I like to live my life in many like capacities is like the worst someone can say is no. And when you learn to hear a no, it's never like punctuated with a period. Like there's like a comma. It's like no, but getting rejected as a writer, there's no one who hasn't been rejected as a writer, despite having won this like fancy title multiple times. Most of my early 20s was spent throwing things at a wall and praying it would stick. And many times it wouldn't. And I would get rejected from magazine after magazine after magazine. And sometimes it was a very simple no, and sometimes it was a no with feedback. But learning to take rejection well is like a lifelong lesson. But especially if you really want to get into the arts, it's good for you. I think it's good for you to be rejected. It teaches you discipline. It teaches you resiliency. Of course, I think you should submit, because really the alternative is someone can say yes. And truly, it takes one yes. And I think about that with my mentor, Raquel. Like, I could have been partnered with anybody, and I was partnered with her, and she gave me like my first yes, and it opened the door to like a million other yeses. It also opened the door to a million no's. The book got rejected. I got a couple of rejections from other agents, but I would 100% say that you need to submit as a practice on rejection. Rejection is very healthy. I think it's very good for you. If we all got what we wanted all the time, I don't think we'd have the art that we have, period. I think about narratives about heartbreak, right? Like, some of the best things come out of something you thought you wanted. So do it. And I always say it's like a no with a comma, no, but, no, and, like, no, but next year, no, and try again. No,
Not yet.
Yes, not yet, really.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not yet here. And it could be a yes somewhere else. But I think there's something to say about just trying.
What is your creative process like? Are you a plotter or a pantser? For our audience who doesn't know what that means, that's basically, do you plot your novel, or do you fly by the seat of your pants and write as it comes to you?
I've been a pantser my whole life until my second book rolled around. My debut, I didn't know what I was doing. I did know, I shouldn't say that, but I didn't have a contract. I didn't have a deadline. I didn't have an editor. I didn't have an agent. It was a pure passion project. And I overwrote because I hadn't outlined. So when it came down to editing the book, a lot of it was, you're scrapping a quarter of this and then bridging these gaps. And that's not always a lot of fun. It turned out great, I think, but I think I could have benefited from outlining more. It's such a simple thing, but on the phone with my editor once, she said, so every chapter should have like action toward a goal, like toward your climax. And I had never thought about writing that way. I really just thought about like, I'm meandering, this character's meandering, and it's beautiful, and I wrote a beautiful page. But as a reader, it's really important to see an arc like that happen. So I learned a lot about craft in having been a pantser for a minute. But as I'm working on my second book, I went through multiple different ideas. I had to outline because I was like, I'm late on turning this one in. No one's on my neck about it, but I knew I was late, and it didn't make me feel good. And in order for me not to be late, and that's where being a teacher, I think, really helped, where I was like, well, I do this stupid little narrative arc every day with my kids of like, and then we do here, and then we get here, and then the problem is resolved. And I really had to say, okay, let's flag this book out. Every Post-it note is a chapter. That means we're getting to a climax, like we're getting to a high point. And then after that, everything needs to be fixed. And as a reader and as a teacher, it sounds so simple. As a writer, it's still a very confusing map to say, but how do you get to that chapter? And well, in this chapter, we haven't answered this question. And there's a lot that's happening, but I've become more of a plotter, and I think I'm better for it. But I will say, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to write a book. My first book, again, I didn't do any of that. And I know a lot of writers who also don't, or who will plot just one or two chapters after.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a nice, friendly in between.
What are you currently working on? Can you tell us anything about it, or any little tidbits we can get?
Oh, I had an interview yesterday where this was asked, and I remember going, I don't know if I want to answer this question, but I answered it. And I can only answer it now because I finished the draft.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. Before, I am a very superstitious person.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, if I tell absolutely anybody what I'm doing, somehow it's just not going to work anymore. I'd been working on and I think this is good advice, not advice. This is a good anecdote for young writers to hear, because this is really what happens sometimes. With my first book, I was working on a different book and it wasn't working. And then I started working on my debut, what is now my debut, but it really wasn't. With my second book, I was contracted. So I think it was due June of this past summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been working on it for over a year. And I would sit at my desk and cry and say, like,
Relatable.
what am I doing? None of it works. Like, definite moments where I was actually like banging my head on the table because there was a different pressure I hadn't expected.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone talked to me about the sophomore slump. Like, you think you know how to write, and then you're contracted for something else. And suddenly you forget. And somehow what made it worse was at the same time my first book was coming out and it was getting these really fantastic reviews that I was very grateful for. But it just opened me up to different questions of like, well, can you do it again? Like, is that going to happen for you again? You haven't even finished. And I was working on a manuscript for over a year. And then in June, when the book was due, I got a different idea. And I remember like going to lunch. I was in New York with my editor and my agent, and I mentioned it in passing. And then I came home and I have a journal on craft. And I just wrote to myself and said, look, this first book is just not working. I don't know when you can revisit it, but you are already behind. And the idea of finishing it made me want to throw up. I was like, I can't do this. I can't sit here anymore. It was miserably sad. It really is. It's a miserably sad book. And one day I'll figure out how to make it better. But I started writing a different book. And it's what had happened with my first book, where I think listening to your artistic intuition is a really important lesson to learn. And I wrote maybe 5,000 or 6,000 words in a day. And I said, okay, I know what's happening. And I set up a call with my editor and my agent. And they both were like, I mean, if that's what you want to do, we're not pressuring you, but go ahead. So I did a NaNoWriMo in June. It successfully, 50,000 words. Okay. The book wasn't done. And then by the end of July, the book necessitated a lot of research. I'd done research. I traveled to the place where the book took place. And I was driving home. I was on a road trip. And I remember crying and being like, oh my God, I have to start over. Like, I have to start it over. And I called my writer friends and I told them what was going on. And they said, yeah, like you have to start over. And that had been my then third attempt at writing my second book.
Mm-hmm.
And I started over at the top of August and finished it just in November. I'm so grateful that I did that. Like, I was very grateful. My second book takes place in Southern California, which is very different for me. I thought I would forever, ever, and ever write about the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. But it has to do with environmental injustice, environmental racism, which is a very different concept compared to my first book.
Right.
And I thought about that very deeply, and I worry about it a lot still. My agent has been really good at saying, like, you can't write the same book over and over again. Maybe you feel like it's a departure, but also it shows people that you have range, like you have the range of a writer. And if you can do it, then you can do it, right? Now, is it finished? No, I'm actually like in the deep throes of revision. Like my editor, God bless her, she's so great, but she sent me a 9 single spaced page, like 9-page single space letter. Yeah. This doesn't work. This fell flat. This character needs this. What about this? Have you thought about this? This was great. This was great. This wasn't that great. We had a 2-hour call last week where we just went through and said, okay, figure it out.
Welcome to Hot Seat. This is the segment where we ask our guests a speed round of questions about life, creativity, and everything in between. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm an introvert through and through.
Would you rather write in a coffee shop or at home?
At home.
Go-to snack while writing?
I don't snack. And I think that's really strange, but I don't.
Who is your personal hero?
I'm gonna list a couple of people,
Mhm.
and they may not make a lot of sense. Jason Reynolds, genius. Rosalia, genius. Olivia Rodrigo, she's genius. Callie Fajardo-Anstein, genius. Frank Ocean, genius. Ocean Vuong, genius. Lots of people.
Caffeine or decaf?
Oh my God, caffeine every day.
Ebooks or physical books?
Physical books.
Would you rather have your novel turned into a TV show or a movie?
I think a TV show.
Do you write in or annotate your books that you own, or do you keep them pristine and new?
Wow. I annotate crazily, and I would actually urge more, if you want to be a writer, you need to tear that book up every time.
Yes.
As a pathway of studying, tear the book up every time.
City or suburbs?
That's hard. I think Oakland is a good combination of both. I'll say suburbs though. I love being comfortable.
Where can people find you? Do you have an Instagram or a website where people can go ahead and look out for your next book?
Yes, I am on Instagram. I am lamentably on X or Twitter or, whatever they're called today. I do have a website. My handle's the same everywhere. It's Carolina, my first name, and my last name, which is Ixta. You can find me there. I try my best to post and to promote, but I find it hard because I think I'm that introverted. But, I will say I do answer my DMs when readers DM. So if anyone ever needs anything from me in that way, yeah, for anything formal, I think my agent's information is on my website.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. And by the time that this airs, you will officially be a published author. So we will 100% leave the link in our bio for everybody to buy it and read it. So congratulations again. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I know that after that conversation, you are dying to get back to your novel in progress, to finish that illustration that you're working on, but hold on, because our next guest is young and wise beyond his years. Our next guest teaches us how art is not only personal, but it's a love language between family. This young artist is a 2022 Gold Medal Portfolio winner, the highest honor students can receive in the Scholastic Art Writing Awards. One of the most unique forms of art, join us as we learn more about quilt making. This guest series of works is titled A Walk in Their Shoes. Through quilt making, this guest concentrates on common themes of immigration and overcoming struggles with the hope of highlighting the American experience. So sit down, grab a snack, and let's hang out with talented artist Mac Barnes.
Let's kick it off just by taking it back to the beginning. Tell me, how did you get inspired and into your type of artwork, and what inspired you to pursue art in general from a young age?
So I grew up really close to my grandparents, and the church that they attended had this sort of fiber community that had a purpose of creating community impact with their crocheted Afghans for wounded veterans. So they were helping serve wounded veterans at VA hospitals, or most notably Fort Bragg in North Carolina, which is not too far from where I'm from in Charlotte. I grew up in this church, so when I would go to church, they would have these blankets that their congregation had made. And my grandmother was a large part of that community. And so I grew up around her crocheting everywhere she went. She brought her current blanket with her that she was working on. And I would always go with her to the store to pick out the red, white, and blue yarn. And when I was about 6 or 7, she taught me how to crochet and was like, I'm going to show you. And I really enjoyed it. And so I would also spend time after school at their house, and she'd be like, oh, you should go YouTube this technique, like you'll figure it out, and then you can show me. And so then I would do that, and then being, the YouTube algorithm how it is, it would then go on to suggest other topics like knitting, which my grandmother did not knit, but she had other people in her church who knitted, and was like, you should try and figure it out. So I did. I just self-taught how to knit, and then it sort of snowballed from there and moved on into quilting, which I think most enjoyed Well, I distinctly remember watching Jenny Doan of Missouri Star Quilt Company and watching her sort of tutorials because they were really accessible on YouTube and they were free, and I had nothing better to do after school, so I would just sit there and watch her. Not an everyday thing, but a pretty much everyday thing. I would spend my weekends doing it, and I would try and imitate her on the sewing machine that I had at the time. And so, my relationship with my grandparents is like really closely tied to my relationship with fiber, so it gives me this sort of warm, fuzzy feeling, which is why I think I really pursued it and continue to, because it's like reliving my childhood every day. So I really love that.
Grandparents are so influential in general, so I truly appreciate that answer. Taking from your childhood, could you tell me what you're studying in college now, and how did the awards like kind of impact your direction to what you wanted to study, anything like that, and how your childhood impacted you to study what you are studying now?
So my dad is a civil engineer and my mom is a elementary school reading teacher, instructional coach. So very different careers, but I think each taught me, my dad is very mathematical, very engineering based, very problem solving skills. And my mom, there's a lot of empathy in the elementary school education world that is needed, and a lot of reading in between the lines sort of skills that I think I often struggled with it, but I as I grew up, I found a love for it, even if it wasn't like in the traditional sense. And so because I grew up around all of that, I knew that that's probably something I would pursue later on. I am currently a sophomore at Washington University in St. Louis, studying computer science and studio art with a sort of concentration in textiles. So I have this sort of love of the mathematical, computational world and what it can do and the sort of precision and problem solving, and I really appreciate it. But I also, I see a lot of ties to, again, the more nuanced, not everything is so cut and dry. And so I think I try to play in the sort of happy middle ground of that with what I do. And I think the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards were really influential in helping me realize that I can play in the middle, because it was recognizing work that did not strictly stray into the traditional sense of the arts, and it also didn't stray into the strictly mathematical. It wasn't a research competition, right? It was an arts. In a way it was, because, I think art is in a way a kind of research of yourself and of other people, and my works definitely were. But it was in the middle ground, and it was recognized on the sort of national scale. And so I think that really pushed me to be okay, in college, you really don't have to pick one or the other. And I went to a STEM high school, and so there, even though it was a STEM high school, I was sort of encouraged to not sort of stick to one or the other if I didn't want to. And so I think this was sort of the reinforcement. The awards were sort of the reinforcement I needed to be I can, this is not just I don't leave this in high school land. I can take this with me to college and beyond.
Where do you see yourself in 15 years? What is your absolute dream?
As much as I recognize how this question gets asked a lot, I always think it's fun to sort of play pretend with your answer and sort of see, how does that feel? Try it on, Like I said, I'm at WashU, but I'm not just sort of strictly studying either. I'm in a program called Beyond Boundaries, where we're really looking at what is the intersection of your two main focuses. And so, what is that middle ground look like? And so we have this sort of big question. Mine is how do we have difficult conversations about traditionally hard to speak to topics using technology and the quilt medium to sort of create this engaging conversation that needs to happen. So an answer to that question, which is what we're sort of pushed to find, has been entrepreneurship. And I have really enjoyed looking and spending time at the Entrepreneurship Center at WashU, because we always are taught if you a jack of all trades is a master of none. But in the startup world, that is the complete opposite. You really need both skills to really have a grasp on your problem and your solution. And so I would really enjoy, I think, in 15 years to still be working in the startup ecosystem and really understanding what does it mean to storytell and have important dialogue through both technical and creative skill sets coming together in a space that is both profitable but also impactful and facilitates change on a social level. And so what I do mostly at the center is I work a venture network that does due diligence on startups that are associated with WashU. And so I really enjoy that part because it's picking apart a story, but also running the technical numbers of, okay, well, what do your financials look like? And so I have really enjoyed how those two come together. But I think outside of that, I will always be sort of making art and pursuing that and pursuing the quilt medium because, again, it has such distinct and personal ties to my childhood. And I really see its value. And I really want to see how far I can push that.
Well, that sounds like a perfect future for you. And we are obviously cheering you on. So we can't wait to circle back to this interview in 15 years and see what you're doing, have you back on the podcast.
Yeah.
Could you kind of walk me through Carnegie Hall, what it felt like getting that award, what that day was like, all the emotions there?
For me, it was a very emotional time. And I spent hours and hours creating these pieces. And I knew that they were important. And I knew, like, regardless of the awards, like, I would want to do something with these works, because that's the whole point, right? Like, how to create that conversation. And the awards were just one way I wanted to do that. But I've never cried on a Zoom call, but I will say the exception would be when these awards, it was just such a relief, because as the maker, I see all the imperfections in the work and I see where I could do better. I remember even on the call, I was like, I can send you better pictures. Like, I know the ones I had weren't that good. They're like, no, they're fine. And so I think for me, it was like that relief of like, I actually did accomplish what I wanted to. And I think me as a very goal oriented, I'm a list person, so like getting to have that, the yes, and validation's not everything, but I think for me, it's something I really appreciated that I had in this. And I felt very fortunate to have in this moment of uncertainty, right, in my life, because I didn't know where I was going to college. And so having that certainty of like, okay, maybe this will turn out how I want it to. And then going to Carnegie Hall, I mean, what an incredible opportunity. And my art teacher went with me, Miss Alter. She's amazing. And so she was a huge support system, and so were my parents. And so I really enjoyed the experience of getting to see other people that won the awards too, and just like have that community of like, we were all the same age. I think in the quilt space, I oftentimes am finding people, I'm usually the youngest person in the room, or it's a different demographic. And I think there's so many pros to that. So it was great to see other creatives my age in the room and hear, oh, what did you do? And like see their work. And like, we did like these workshops and people were just drawing up a storm. And I just really loved that, because it was like, oh, wow, like I get to be me and I get to learn from other people. And in this wonderful, amazing setting of like Carnegie Hall in New York City, I wouldn't have rather been anywhere else.
I think you are not alone in that feeling of validation and how, it's not everything, but it is so important to encourage teens at that time in their life to keep going and to see like, oh, this is not all in my head. Like, I actually maybe have talent too,
Yeah.
which you do. And your artwork is so beautiful.
Get ready for Hot Seat.
Are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Do you drink coffee or tea?
Coffee. I literally drink a coffee right before coming in.
Do you work in the morning or at night or the afternoon?
At night. Always at night.
What is your favorite snack while working, if you have one?
Chocolate. Yes. Chocolate or chocolate peanut butter, anything in that combination.
What would your 6-year-old self say if they saw you now?
Probably like ask why my hair is so long, because 6-year-old me had a buzz cut. Like, I don't know. I think you would point out like the most random thing.
What is your most listened to song or artist on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you listen to music?
Renee Rapp. Easily, she's from Charlotte. I'm from Charlotte. I love her. I love her music.
Who are 3 famous people you would invite to your dinner party?
I think Neil deGrasse Tyson would be a really interesting person. Keith Haring.
Okay.
That would be a really fascinating conversation. And third person?
If you only have 2, that absolutely works.
Yeah.
Perfect. If your work could be in any museum in the entire world, what museum would you pick?
The International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Okay, and last question before we wrap this up is, where can people find you? Do you have an Instagram or a website that people can go and check your work out and see where your fabulous career will take you?
Yes, so you can find me on Instagram at macbarnes.art. Pretty simple. And my website is the same, just www.macbarnes.art. That's it. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Mac. It was so fascinating to learn about your art and your upbringing and all of that. And we can't wait to see where your career takes you.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And thank you for asking such great questions.
Before you go, we have one more guest today who I am so positive is going to motivate you to run to your nearest Starbucks and finish that screenplay of yours, or maybe even start that screenplay of yours that you know you've always had in the back of your head but maybe haven't pursued yet. A writer and director living in Los Angeles, this guest is a 2004 Scholastic Awards alumna and was our 2023 Alumni Microgrant Program juror. She has written and produced TV shows for Hulu, directed a debut short film called Thumb, which premiered at the 2021 Fantasia Film Festival, and she is currently developing her first feature film. Previously, as a magazine writer, her writing has been published in Vogue, the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and many other publications. Please welcome Alexandra Pechman. To start off, how about you just walk me through where you are in your career, what you're up to, and how you got to where you are today?
I'm currently a screenwriter. I'm also a director. I write films. I've written a streaming movie. I'm in the process of a couple other ones and my debut feature. How I got there is I always wanted to be a writer from when I was like 10, but even before that, I loved reading. My mom even says that she didn't even realize I had learned to read. Like one day she went to pick me up from a friend's house who I loved going to their house. She's like, "Oh, it's so great. Allie like loves playing with your kids." And they're like, the mom is like, "Actually, Allie doesn't really play with our kids that much. She just goes upstairs and reads." My mom's like, "Well, Allie doesn't read." She's like, "No, she reads." So some of my earliest memories of school are just of reading everything. And then when I was 12-ish or so, I also started making little movies with my friends, little weird fake mockumentary kind of like fake Waiting for Guffman-esque by 12-year-olds, which were obviously really good. But that was also around the time I started creative writing and writing my own little stories. And it would have been, when I was in 8th grade that I would have submitted to the Art and Writing Awards. I knew about it because I loved books, obviously, as I said, and I would go to the local Borders like all the time and re-up on different books. And there was this book called Be Here Now, or it had some sort of like title like that was a published Scholastic book of kids who had submitted to the Art and Writing Awards. And it had poems and plays, and stories and essays and also art in it. And I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Like the idea that I, as a teenager, could have something that was on the shelf at the bookstore was crazy. And I became really, really interested, if not obsessed, with the awards and what they meant. And I like read every single thing that was in that book. And that was what got me to submit to the awards.
Can you walk us through what you remember from your experience of winning the award? So you won a national award in 2004 and you went to Carnegie Hall. Can you talk to us about how that felt as a teen and also what you could tell today's teens who are entering the awards today?
It was amazing. I mean, I won the gold regional key. So even just winning that, I was really excited. And then that led to getting the national award. And I think it was like the first thing that had happened that really signaled to my parents that this was something I was really serious about. You know, your 10-year-old says, "I want to be a writer." And, they want to be an astronaut the next day. And so, and I went to Carnegie Hall. I met a lot of the other kids. I got to do the workshops that they had at the time. I remember mine was the man who had written the book for Hairspray, which I didn't even know what that was. Like, that there's someone who writes the play part of the musical, and just getting to see professionals talk to us like this was a career that we were going to be part of was really validating. And my story that I wrote was published in the book that comes out every year. And I felt it was extremely exciting. It was really cool. I remember getting to see that and being very gratified by that feeling.
So did that experience kind of impact what you studied in college? What happened after that?
Definitely. I mean, I think that like for someone who had felt pretty strongly and passionately that I wanted to be a writer, those awards really served as a reflection of that from like a wider world, that like this is a community that you're part of among other like-minded kids, and then also the interaction with adults who were doing that. And so I kept submitting to the awards and getting the regional keys, and I wrote for the high school newspaper. I kept writing stories and little plays, and I eventually went to journalism school. Actually, I didn't get to that in the beginning, but my path toward filmmaking was actually, I was a journalist first, and my career was as a writer in that way, and then led back around. But definitely having that having that inspiration as a kid that you're on the right path had a big impact.
Absolutely. Validation at that age is everything, and really either creates a writer or steers somebody away from being a writer. So it's so important. I'm so interested in how you kind of bounced around in your writing life from journalism to screenwriting. I want to know, what is your creative process like? How do you just walk me through? Are you a morning writer, a night writer? What is your process?
That has changed a lot. Obviously, I used to report. I wrote some book reviews and things like that, and essays, and then I ultimately, through most of my journalism career, was writing about contemporary art and traveled a lot, and wrote about contemporary art in places like China and Brazil. So my creative process and schedule was really chaotic in those days, and would be, you physically have to be in the place where the story is happening, which is just a really big difference than any kind of fictional writing.
Right.
Even in fictional writing, you do research, but it's, you ultimately are actually crafting the story when you sit at your desk. These days, I mean, it really depends on the project. I feel like every project has its own particular character, and you have to sort of listen to what it's telling you and be in a kind of relationship with that story. I do find, for the most part, getting up and making a commitment to sit at your desk by a particular time is the best thing. Like, I come from having had an office job for most of my 20s, working at various magazines, and like, you sit from 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, and when I'm in the middle of a project, I really try to do some version of that. But it also depends on what the project is telling me feels right.
So when you're going into a project, do you start with character first or concept first? Or a little bit of both?
Probably the concept. I mean, probably the concept. I mean, the things that I'm working on now, were things that are inspired by an article or a famous writer's life that I was always interested in, or a detail from that, or something I read. I mean, so often I feel like the best ideas start with something that I read, and particularly something that I read a long time ago, or something that felt formative, or something that I've been thinking about for a really long time. Like, oh, I saw that in an article, or that was some detail that stuck out to me about something that I read, or an art show I've seen. I feel like that's where most of them come from. It rarely does it start with the character for me, unless it's something that's taken from an experience that I had. I don't really write things where I am a lead character in anything. That would be, I think, quite weird for me. But I think that would be the only time it would feel like it would start from a character. Usually I'm sort of like, how do I make this character not me?
Do you have any advice for a teen out there listening who maybe is on the fence about submitting to the awards? You know, getting your work out there is really intimidating for anyone, no matter how old you are. But do you have any advice for kind of that leap, putting your work out there and being brave in that way?
I definitely think any young person who feels any semblance of desire to submit should do it. I just think that the people that I met or was exposed to, it was so formative and important. I mean, I remember one of those books. It was either the one that my story was in or the one that we were given from the year prior. The introduction was written on one of the years by Joyce Carol Oates, and the other year it was Lori Moore. And I had never heard of those writers before when I was 13 or 14. So those are also now probably my two favorite fiction writers who are alive today.
If you could go back in time and tell your teen self something about your ongoing career, some words of inspiration, what would you say to yourself winning the award?
I mean, just to keep writing. I think like keep writing, keep making weird little movies. Like I think every new thing that you write, every little weird film you make at that age, especially, it's less about the thing that you're making and more about deepening your relationship with your craft, and with your art and with yourself, understanding yourself when you are in the creative space and when you feel good when you make something, when you feel bad when you make something. It's like it's so valuable at a young age just to keep going and keep experimenting with that and really valuing that relationship with yourself. So I would just say to keep doing that.
What are you currently working on right now?
I'm writing a movie for Amazon. I'm in my rewrites right now. I'm developing my debut feature, which is about Patricia Highsmith, a great writer. And I have other scripts that I've written, and I'm trying to, find the right time to take them out and the right people to connect with on them.
So it's safe to say that you're juggling a lot of projects at the same time.
Yes, it's kind of the nature of the business is have lots of things because it's very uncertain. And as we just saw, having gone through a big writer's strike.
Absolutely. Congratulations on that finally being over. So amazing.
Thank you. I'm really proud of the Guild and proud to be part of the Guild.
Welcome to Hot Seat. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Number 1, who is a celebrity you would like to have dinner with, dead or alive?
That is actually a really easy one, Oprah, because I won this high school essay contest that she did not that long after the Writing Awards, which the Writing Awards probably gave me the confidence to submit to that. And I would really like to meet her again and chat about what's happened since.
That is a great answer, Oprah. If you are listening, let's make this happen. Number 2, what is your favorite book of all time? Terrible question to ask, but I gotta know.
The Age of Innocence.
Are you a city person or a suburbs person?
I guess city, but LA is barely an urban city.
Sweet or savory?
Savory.
What season do you think you're the most creative in?
Summer, because no one is asking that much of you and it kind of feels like everyone is off somewhere else.
What is one of your greatest accomplishments professionally?
I think making the transition to to screenwriting, you know, like having had a career that I was happy with and proud of in magazine journalism, and then successfully making a shift in my late 20s that sort of like manifested by the time I was in my 30s. I feel proud of taking that leap.
What is the best writing advice that you have received?
My college poetry professor, who's kind of a mentor to me, Mary Kinsey, would say, don't write every day, which really goes, she was very like, why would you write every day? And I think like, yeah, it sort of goes against what I just said, if you have to sit in front of the desk every day. But like, I also think that, you know, an hour of really amazing work is, you know, worth more than 8 hours of, so just finding the balance between those two poles, probably.
Who is your hero and why?
Like my grandpa.
And last question, where can our audience find you? Do you have a social media platform or a website, anything like that?
I do have a website. I have social media, which is just Ali Pechman. Although like my professional name is Alexandra, but everybody calls me Ali. Yeah, and my website is my full name, alexandrapechman.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alexandra, for an awesome conversation. I know that everyone listening is going to be super inspired by your story and so excited for your future projects.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. I feel like it's a really great way to reach kids who should definitely submit to the awards.
That's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed the second episode of Hall Pass, the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards official podcast. A huge thank you to our talented guest for sharing your wisdom and words of encouragement with the rest of us. If you are Scholastic Awards alumni and are interested in being a Hall Pass guest, feel free to email us at social@artandwriting.org and tell us a little bit about you. And of course, if you had fun listening to today's episode and took away any inspiration at all, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating or a review. It would mean the world to us because, you know, artists support artists and writers support writers, and that is what makes the industry go round. Please remember to follow us on social media at Art and Writing and come to our comment section and tell us what you loved about the podcast, what you'd love to hear more about the podcast. We want to hear your opinions because this podcast is for you. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you continue working on your projects and that you stay motivated and especially stay creative. Bye, everyone.